Well, I guess we're live.
Hello.
How are you? Greetings from House Family Vineyards. A beautiful spring day. Although a little bit of clouds, but we're going to deal with that. But the vineyards, as you can see, are growing well. We've got a beautiful mustard cover crop going. Jonathan, why don't you tell a little bit about what's out there in terms of the cover crop?
Well, the cover crop is a custom mixture I've sort of designed to meet our various needs. It has some grains like oats and barley in it, which have really fine roots to hold the soil and prevent it from erosion because the vineyards are so steep. We have the mustard, as you pointed out already, that has like long roots which go down, even hold the soil, tap roots which hold the soil better and pull up nutrients from deeper down. And then we have a lot of legumes. There's peas, there's veg, there is beans, which capture nitrogen from the air, so we don't have to buy nitrogen fertilizer and throw out. The plants do it for us.
So a little green manure.
Exactly, if you will. And then on top of everything else, we have a vast variety of flowers. So all kinds of beneficial insects, including wild bees, find nutrients and feed here. And so we're creating a little biotope here.
Great. So I guess I should have introduced myself. I'm Jim Cargill, winemaker for House Family Vineyards. This is my colleague.
I'm Jonathan Goodling, the vineyard manager for House Family Vineyards.
And you could tell by his accent that he's not from Texas.
No, I came here about 2.5 years ago from Germany, where I studied viticulture and enology. And, well, love brought me to California, and these guys were good enough to give me a job, even though they didn't have a position for me, as Jim told me on the first interview. But, you know, there is always something to do, he told me.
And he's made good use of his time, and he's obviously still here. And we're blessed to have him, and all the knowledge that he brings from both Europe and and locally. I think we're going to be joined by Cody.
Oh.
Cody's walking through. There she is. In case all you who know her. So anyways, the point of today.
What did you bring us?
So it's a Duo of Pinot, and we actually do a bunch of different Pinots. So my dream a long time ago. Jim House out there saying hi. Hey. My dream quite a few years ago, and this has taken close to 10 years in planning, was to really, Pinot Noir is just this one grape that wants to be made into wine. It's a beautiful, nuanced grape, thin skin. It makes you work for it. It's not like a Cabernet that's big and jumps right out at you, or a Syrah. And so I really wanted to be able to taste the terroir of California. So I started researching vineyards, and I wanted vineyards that had that we represent about 150 miles of coastal California, from Monterey all the way to Sonoma. And in doing so, I had to research vineyards that had a coastal influence, similar soil types, similar clones. And then I could treat the wines the same in the vineyard. So, a little bit of nature versus nurture. And run them all the way through, and so that the only difference in these two vines is actually where they're grown. We do two other Pinots kind of in between this that really exemplify how we do this. And we picked these two because they're probably the most different of the four Pinots in there. So anyways, and I know some of you out there have these wines, and so hopefully you're opening those up. Let me talk real quick about some fun ways to preserve wine. Have over here a fun prop. So this is called a Coravin, for those of you that see that in there somewhere. I think I'm in the camera. Wrong camera. Sorry. Trying to figure that out. So this is a Coravin. If you didn't want to open the full bottle of wine, you can certainly use one of these. It'll dispense out a single glass of wine, a single pour of wine, puts in argon, preserves the wine. So it's nice. It'll preserve the wine probably for a month or so. But I don't find these terribly useful because I typically tend to, get through the full bottle. But we're going to do that today. So the other way you could preserve these is just put them in the refrigerator and keep the heat off of them. Don't leave them on your counter. Put the cork in them, and the wines will actually develop over the day or the couple of days, with a little bit of oxygen on there, kind of develop into, get their flavors. The oxygen will eventually harm the wine, but in a day or two, the wines will actually develop. And so that's one technique I use to determine if a wine is ready to drink. So when I'm looking at young wines, I take them and I'll drink them over several days, watch how they develop, and see, the day they're most shy or not. And, if they're ready to drink, well, that's, the wine tells me when it's ready to drink.
By the way, for you guys who can't really see that, there's some beautiful tartrates on the inside of the cork. Some beautiful, wrong camera again, but beautiful tartrates, almost like ruby diamonds. And that's because we have very little doing to sort of find the wines, and we leave them as natural as possible. By the way, we're saying hi to Rootstock out there. How are you guys doing?
Hey there. Appreciate you joining us, Christy. All right, and we got a few more. Nice color on that.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, Salt and Stall. Is that color? Maybe this camera.
You have Instagram and
this
Facebook.
camera or that camera? All right, we're figuring this out. So, we play in the dirt all day. We don't play with this technology.
Exactly, that's all new to us.
So these wines, I talked about the similarities in these wines. So they have the same clones. They have the same pedigree. So they're the Dijon clones, which are the 667, 777, and 117. I'm sorry, 115. Excuse me. So those are classic Dijon clones from France. They're cool climate vineyards and clones. Jonathan, why don't you talk a little bit about clones and what is a clone or what does it do?
Well,
in the vineyard.
That is sometimes a little bit confusing. So we have vine varieties, or actually cultivars, because they're not like found in the wild anymore. They were cultivated and selected. And so there is, for instance, the cultivar Pinot Noir. But then within the Pinot Noir, there will be slight genetic differences. And these slight genetic differences we call clones. And they're clones from Dijon, they're clones from other parts of France, they're clones which were found here in California. And they're all Pinot Noir, they all share enough types, so they are all part of the same cultivar, but there's slight difference. Some of them will have a little bit looser bunches, some of them will have a little bit thicker skin, some of them will have a little bit longer berry stems, making the bunches bigger. And so that are these slight differences when we talk about clones within the same variety of grapes.
Excellent. So they have the same pedigree. So the same ingredients, kind of like cookies. You all know I'm probably a chef, or a lot of you do. So it's like making cookies. You got butter, sugar, flour, and it's the same ingredients. So it should make the same cookie, right? Well, if you're drinking these wines, or we'll go through these, show you the colors, talk about the similarities and difference, and kind of prove that that's not actually the case. So we got a big shout out to Juan Pablo.
Hey, Lupa,
Argentina. So Juan, we were supposed to, I don't have my watch on, a couple of days. It's super sad. We were supposed to be there down in Argentina. It's harvest. I'm just dying not being there. We were supposed to go on Monday, but that's not happening.
Yeah,
so
life happened. Things changed.
Yeah. All right. And we have Florian Hunsiger from Facebook. He's here. He's online. Nice. And Yun Fujisawa from Tokyo. I think you may win. Thanks for joining us. And Jonathan, just so you know, Jonathan and I do talk each morning, and we talk about what we're going to wear each day. And so he was going to go tucked in, I was going to go untucked. I could do the tuckle.
It's a little bit like the clone things. It's the same. It's the same variety, but a little bit different.
Anyways, back to these wines. So both of these wines they come from a cool climate. They're coastal wines I talked about, so representing California's coast. The coastal influence, the fog, is what really sets these wines apart. Versus our wines here. Could we grow Pinot Noir here?
We wish, but no, it's way too hot here on our property.
We would burn it up.
We burn it up completely. Yeah. And I mean, it would grow, you would get grapes, but they would just not have the complexity and the flavor which you really expect from a Pinot, and it would just be sad.
fortunately, we can grow Cabernet. So that'll be an upcoming tasting, but we'll do the Cabernet. So Pinot Noir, we source these from other vineyards. They're not technically our vineyards. It's not, we don't own the soil, but we do have rights to the actual vineyard. So I'm gonna come up to the camera here. It's low tech, because that's the way I roll. So low tech right here. I'm showing you the. This is a map of the Saltonstall Vineyard. Is that better?
Yeah, a little up.
All right. Is that good?
Mhm.
My technical crew back here. It's awesome. So you'll see right in here, these rows right in here, this is our section. So I share this vineyard with Kistler. So Jason Kistler Wines, you all may have heard of those. He desperately wants these wines, but I've took about 8 years to get these specific rows. And this is the 115, 667, and 777, all where they all come together. So the 3 clones, they ripen together. It's well controlled right in this area. So he desperately wants that, but I won't give it up. So I've got the meat of the sandwich right there. And, that's too bad for him, but Jason and I get along. But Sam Saltonstall, I've been working with him for many years. He gets us those wonderful grapes from there. And I could show you, in terms of cool climate, props here. So this is the Petaluma Gap. Saltonstall Vineyard is right here, and it's about 5 miles out the Tamales Bay as the coast, as the crow flies coming out there. And so it gets a nice fog influence, about 350 feet is where the, how the fog gets in there and influences those grapes, keeps them nice and cool. As opposed to, this map's a little harder to see, so my tech crew is going to have to tell me if I'm doing a good job. So Camel Hill Vineyard is right in this area above Lexington Reservoir. Camel Hill right there. It's about 20 miles out to the coast. But Camel Hill gets this really nice fog influence through the gap in the Los Gatos Gap, and so it gets a fog influence right over Lexington Reservoir. The bay, the San Francisco Bay, draws that fog up over the hill into this gap and gives it a coastal influence of fog. So even though it's further, it still gets a coastal influence. So both of them get that. The soil types on both of these slightly different. There's a more sandy loam soil in the Saltonstall Vineyard, and in Los Gatos, it's a little more. Santa Cruz Mountains has a Santa Clara formation.
So to begin with, loam is a very rich soil. It's wonderful. It holds a lot of water. It has a bunch of nutrients. So it could be great. The trouble is when it gets dry, it gets hard as concrete. You can literally make bricks out of loam. So the challenge with loam is you gotta loosen it up. So that is one of the reasons why we have all the cover crops, because we introduce organic matter to sort of get some more air in it and lighten it up. But so if you do that, then you have a great soil. It holds a lot of water, has a bunch of nutrients, and it can be a really, really good soil. When you have a more sandy loam, then the sand does kind of that job. It loosens the loam, breaks it up a little bit, gives it a little bit more structure. It drains better, which is really important for vines, because vines rather have it a little bit too dry than they have it too wet. And so if you have it a little bit more sandy, then you have a lighter soil, and that is often better for the vineyards. Also, lighter soils warm up quicker in the winter. I realize that doesn't play as much of a big role here in California than it does in Europe, where after the winter, the soil is literally frozen solid, and then you want it to warm up and thaw. So that plays a role in other parts of the world too. Good,
thank you. So we'll get the maps over to Facebook side here in just a second, over on this one.
YouTube, yeah.
So this is, if you can see here. So Camel Hill is right there, and we're about 20 miles out to the coast. But this is where the fog influence draws in from the San Francisco Bay. So it brings it in from the Monterey Bay right over this gap and gets the coastal influence. And then we have both. In case you didn't see these, this is these are our vineyards for Coast View. I'm sorry, Saltonstall. This is the middle section here is where we have it for our grapes, the 115, 667, and 777. And then to show you where Saltonstall is here, Tamales Bay is there, about 5 miles there. Gets a nice coastal influence and fog. All right. So I hope you guys have opened these wines. Those of you that had them, let's actually do a taste of them, and then we'll kind of talk through some kind of some of these points on them. Talk about the actual winemaking process. So, all right. So we'll start with the Camel Hill. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers to all of you out there.
Yeah.
Hey, Louise. How are you? All the way from Tennessee.
Hey.
Nice. Is Becky on? She better be.
The good thing about this whole crisis is all that day drinking that happens these days. So that's, we've really been enjoying that.
A lot of differences in these wines. A lot of nuances. Again, both same ingredients, same winemaking, and I'll touch on some of that in just a moment. All right, so both solid Pinots, well represented, coastal Pinots. Once a decision to pick happens, and that I look for a fruit that's about 22 and a half bricks, usually creeps up to about 23. Hey, Tim Phillip out in Georgia, longtime buddy of mine. Good to see you. Probably on Facebook, I know. Anyway, so we've got so make the decision to pick, and that's always a tough time because
everything gets ripe at the same time. Yeah. For a long time there's nothing, and you're ready, you're waiting. It's sort of the quiet before the storm. I remember last harvest, I totally jinxed it, and we got the first couple of grapes, and I was like, hey, this is actually kind of nice, but and he was like, don't jinx it. And sure enough, I think like 10 days later, the grapes started dumping on us, and we worked like 18-hour days for 2 months straight. I think
got our heads handed to us.
It was a rough harvest. Anyways,
we got what we wished for. Harvest was on,
and a little more.
So once the decision to pick is happens, we pick the grapes, we get them in. Bring them into the vineyard. I want to work them as quick as possible. I don't want the grapes to sit in the bins. They crushes them down. It's a little rough on them. We want to process them, de-stem them, and then we'll I'll make a decision on some whole cluster versus fully de-stemmed. In that process.
And maybe not everybody knows what whole clusters add to the mixture, quite literally.
So good question. So what the whole cluster does is the whole clusters, the grapes come in cold. So these are picked, they start picking at 11, 12 o'clock at night. And they, in doing that, we pick the grapes up probably at 4 or 5 in the morning, bring them into the winery probably by 9 or 10 in the morning. And then those grapes are so nice and cold. When we de-stem them, they warm up some. The whole clusters they're like heat sinks or cold sinks. And they're going to add coldness to the must, which I want. I want to keep it nice and cold because that's going to be part of the next process is the cold soaking. I do about a 3 to 5 day cold soak to let the grapes kind of rest and settle in. That's what helps develop the color in the wine. So the actual flesh of the grapes is white, but the red wine gets its color from the actual skins. So that 3 to 5 days, I may get a week out of it, but typically not with these Pinots. They tend to start pretty quickly. What I do, spontaneous inoculations. Sometimes it's called native inoculations. So therefore, I don't add any yeast, commercial yeast to these wines. I want them to be as natural as possible and stay out of the way of the wine. I think that's probably one of the jobs of the winemaker is not to mess it up. So he actually makes the wine by these pristine grapes.
pour in a lot of sweat and sometimes literally blood in those grapes. And harvest comes around, and I hand them over to him and say, don't mess it up.
That's my job, is to make sure it gets to your glass in pristine condition. So in doing that, we get the cold soak. If the ferments start, the yeast starts to starts that fermentation process. I checking them every day. Once it starts, I just let them go, and they start a fermentation. Try to keep the temperatures down in Pinot Noirs. They ferment very quickly, 3 to 4 days, and they're done with fermentation. We press them off and let them settle, and they're going to go to barrels. Unlike Cabernet, which may spend 21 days, 3 weeks on the skins to get that process going, a much slower process with Cabernet. Pinot Noirs are very fast. It'll literally ferment overnight. So looks like we have Will and Deanne houses. We've got a lot of houses out there. So thank you.
Hello,
They're loving the wine. Chris
Thanks
from
for
San
tuning
Jose
in.
is out there, and Lavender Field says hi. Love the hats.
Well, thank you.
Gotta have keep that skin cancer down. Got to stay protected. So kind of run through that once they start going. Then we go to the oak program. About 30 to 40% oak. I'm not a huge fan of big oak. If there's some wines are a little bit over oaked in my opinion. And that's a stylistic choice. Of the winemaker. I like the oak to influence the wines, not overpower them. I don't like to taste the heavy oak. They spend about 11 months in oak, and then we take about single racking. You may notice the salt and stall, if you are drinking that, probably a slightly cloudier than the Camel Hill, and it's just kind of just what's in it. It doesn't bother me one bit. I do like that in there. It's non-filtered. It just has that single racking, and that's basically taken it out of the barrel, goes to a tank, and then gets adjusted and ready for bottling. So some wines, a lot of other commercial wines, they go through a lot of filtration. To me, it really strips them down, strips out a lot of the flavor. It's done for big commercial practices. They're sending wine all over the place.
Speeds up the process.
Yeah, it does. But in my opinion, it kind of dumbs the wine down. But that's the choice of the winemaker and what you're doing. I love our small production and that I can stay very much in touch with the vineyard and bring that right to your glass. So you're gonna.
He says that all the time. However, he spends very little time in the vineyard.
So they spend about 2 to 3 years in the bottle before we release them. These are 17s, so it's right about on time. The actual year, the vintage, so the 17 vintage was brutally hot in September. We were hitting about 109. Napa was, they were literally on fire, unfortunately, but they were also hitting, some really high temperature in there, which this is when these were just getting ripe, and that sped up that ripening process. So they came off the vine a little bit early. Scramble to get the grapes picked, again, to those picking decisions. But that's what happens. That's nature. Mother Nature doesn't. She doesn't. They're same vineyards, but they're so different.
There is a question about this wine barrel here. Will is asking whether it still has wine in it. No, we drank that earlier today, so no, it's empty by now.
We started early.
Yeah.
So yep, all empty.
These, Jim was talking about the oak regime earlier. So these barrels, once we've used them for a couple of years, the taste out of them is gone. And then they're neutral barrels, and you only need so many neutral barrels. So that's the time when we're actually starting to sell these barrels. We cut them in half and use them for planters, or we're trying to make new things out of them. Pretty soon you'll be able to purchase ground up barrels, like we send them through a wood chipper, and you can use them in your barbecues at home to smoke, make some barbecue and smoke some meat. And so that's where these barrels ultimately go. And sometimes we just use them as a stand. So this is, again, an empty barrel.
So that's a barrel stave, and you can see the color that's the outside, and then the inside of the barrel that gets the color. We're taking some of these apart, and you can kind of see the difference in that from the outside to the inside. A lot of that's the toast of the barrel. So we make all kinds of things, back scratchers and all kinds of fun stuff. So, all right, we got my wife. Hi, honey.
Hey, how are you doing, Kelly? Sorry for the inconvenience earlier today.
Yeah.
been then doing some woodworking.
Woodworking outside her office. You know, that's what happens when we all work from home. I normally work from home, but Roberta,
Hey,
Whitty, my kid's school teacher, wine club member, she's online. Thank you. So anyway, let's talk about some of the differences of these wines. So the Camel Hill is probably, to me, much more Burgundian in style than the Saltonstall. Saltonstall is, to me, a more New World style wine. I mean, they're both done in the same style, but they kind of come across that way.
Yeah.
Burgundian versus New World.
But so if we talk about that, I mean, you hear it all the time, but Burgundian versus the New World, what does it mean to you? Me, I think it's like, how would you describe it?
So I guess Burgundian, I love Burgundian style wines. I love New World style wines. I love them both, and they both have a different place on the table. A Burgundian wine to me is a more reserved, austere wine. It really makes you reach for it. It's more nuanced. It has, just more concentrated flavors, but it takes a while to open up. Versus the New World, they tend to be bigger fruit. Just kind of more bold wines. There's different times that I want to drink one versus the other.
Yeah.
So the Camel Hill, I get, to me, that's got a really nice complexity to the nose, but not as big of fruit as the Saltonstall. The Saltonstall is much more berry rich fruit. It's kind of this amalgam of red ripe fruit.
Almost a little bit like strawberry-like.
Just classic in Pinots. Pinots can typically have a lot of cherry, cola notes, and that's what the Saltonstall has in it. The Camel Hill definitely has a brighter acid profile, which immediately, to me, makes that a better food pairing wine. The acid, helps cleanse the palate and
balance it. So you have other things, other other flavors, or something a little bit more fat, meat or something like that. I agree.
Being from Europe, how would you describe a Burgundian style wine?
Well, I guess it's the first easy approach to think about it is certainly temperature. Cooler temperature. Burgundy is an area which almost regularly has, for instance, trouble with spring frost. These wines much easier to pair with food, but they're also not as approachable. They're much more closed. They need more time. They're a little bit more rougher around the edges. The tannins can be a little bit more challenging. So these wines need more time before they open up. You almost want to drink. And so the acidity can sometimes be a little bit challenging in that you just don't have the acidity you want, but you get these wonderful amalgam of fruit, very, very rich and very approachable wines. Which are great to drink within themselves, for day drinking. We mentioned it earlier today. Like we are doing right now, a wine like that is really nice.
Quite day drinking. This is we're almost done with the day.
Anyways, there are a couple of questions I see here.
Yeah.
There's
all right, Michael Dean.
Dean asked about is whiskey aged in wine barrels.
Absolutely.
And there is not quite as much of like classical wine barrels. They often use sherry barrels, so out of Spain, because the sherry barrels they bring a little bit more of the sweetness and these like very complex sherry notes. But you will find whiskeys aged in Burgundy barrels, but not quite as much. Also because they can impart actually a little bit of color, and you don't really want a pink whiskey, so that is often used a little bit more carefully.
So, Michael, are you drinking whiskey right now? I noticed you used an E in your question, so that would be an Irish whiskey, not a true Scotch, but no. I hope you're drinking the wines. But all right, we got another question. Will House, what kind of beef would you pair? Well, I would.
That's a very specific question. What kind of beef? I mean,
that is. So I would actually technically probably do pork with the Pinots and beef. Beef would be a good one. I may do a flank, something a little thinner and not quite as meaty, and I can get some texture to it. Maybe do it with some root vegetables. and I'd probably do it with the Camel Hill. Yeah. So, but the Cabernet, when we get to the Cabernet tasting, I'll tell you all about that. Maybe we'll even bring the pizza oven out.
We should have a nice little steak with that.
That's next time.
Yeah, exactly.
Then you'll all want to be here. And,
yeah. Juan Pablo would know how to do that.
Exactly. We could do it Argentinian style. So the Sultan Stall, as you were mentioning, a little bit bigger in fruit. I would call that more of a cocktail style wine, something that I would drink just on its own, day drinking in the afternoon. Very nice just to kind of sit and enjoy the wine, the grapes as themselves. It's kind of a complete package in its own. Not that it wouldn't pair with food, but it's a great wine, for that. And so that's what I love about making these two different wines is that they kind of manifest in just a different style, and they both belong on the table at a certain point.
Yeah.
This may be when I'm cooking and just getting the meal ready,
right.
Whereas the Camel Hill is
then
when I actually have
the meal. Yes.
So
exactly.
I mean they're just that's the beauty of the wines and how they kind of manifest and kind of work through. So yeah, I think we've covered these wines. If there's any questions, we're happy to answer those. Looking, we'll get another one of these up probably next Wednesday. I think we'll have our next one up. And getting a question here: is the wine available to ship within the United States? Absolutely. We can ship, I believe, to all 50 states. There may be some limitations at some point. Some states have some strange stipulations. However, they're relaxing some of the laws with the shelter at home for a lot of the states. So,
otherwise people go crazy.
Yeah. I think wine sales is definitely up, and so yeah. So, question: which wine is your favorite?
I hate that question.
Yeah.
I hate that question.
So it's like I think my kids, maybe my daughter's on if she's on. Well, Lane, you're my favorite daughter, but then I think my other daughters may be watching with mom. But Grace, you're my favorite, or Emily, you're my favorite. I always say it's the one. It's like the child that's not talking back to you is my favorite, and that to me is the one that's not giving me the most conflict of what I'm doing and eating and experiencing. So which is my favorite right now? If I'm gonna just get off camera here, stop talking, and wet my whistle, I'm going to drink the Sultan Stall. That's the one I'm going to drink. Tonight at dinner, I'm going to have the Camel Hill. So they both have different places. If it was 85 degrees, I'd be drinking Rosé or Sauv Blanc, and I don't want to snuggle up to a glass of Cabernet. So that's really how I define what my favorite wine is. How about you, Jonathan?
That's exactly what I said. I didn't want to offend anybody by saying I hate this question, but that's the point, right? It's there's so many different occasions, and the wine really has to match the occasion. And so I would agree, right? Probably more the Sultan Stall. However, it gets a little bit chilly, so maybe there's something warmer in an hour or so. I might enjoy a Cabernet. But so really you want to match the wine to the occasion. And at the moment it's a Sultan Stall, but tonight it's going to be something else.
So, and that actually leads into the next question from Chris. So Chris asked, what wine, what crop is most beneficial in Saratoga? Neither of these would be beneficial. It'd be tough to grow. Cabernet really grows well in California, and specifically in Saratoga. So this is a very storied area right here. We have some historic Cabernet vineyards on this side of the Appalachian. So when I showed you the Appalachian, and I can flash that again, and get it to a couple of the cameras. This is the AVA. This is a huge growing area. It's 1,500 acres. I'm sorry, it's 1,500 growing acres, but it encompasses hundreds of square miles worth of growing climate. But the east side over here is where we are. And this western side down south gets a lot of cold. The south side down here, the east, the west side, we're on the east, much warmer here, suited for Cabernet. So, Chris, to answer your question, Cabernet is the wine of choice here. It does very well. We have Ridge Vineyards, Mount Eden Vineyards, and along this west side, and that's what was grown here for many, many years. I mean, since the turn of the century. back into the 1800s. Actually, they've been growing Cabernet on this west side. We get the sun comes up just straight back away from us in the morning. It warms the vines immediately, and then as the sun sets, the angle it gets more oblique, and it doesn't burn the vines, and so it gets this really nice from about 3 o'clock on to about 7 o'clock. This really nice cool down, which the grapes love, and it really kind of it makes for beautiful, perfect ripening, especially in the month of October. We have about 80 degrees here, almost start to finish. So you may notice that these vine rows run straight away from me. Jonathan, why do we do that?
Well, I want to say almost, particularly in this vineyard, it's one of the steepest we have. Otherwise, I couldn't drive them with a tractor. The tractor already has like steel tracks in order to get up and down. And if we would go anyway sideways, I would start sliding. I can really only go like straight up or straight down. But obviously, there's also the orientation towards the different directions in north, south, east, west. And so the ideal is that you run at least in the old days the rows from north to south, because then when the sun at noon is the highest, the canopy sort of shades the grapes so they will not get too hot and will not get burned. And that is sort of the idea. Where we don't have this exact orientation, we work with leaf pulling. So, for instance, we will not pull the leaves on the morning side, because the morning side here is actually the side where we get the most sun, and so it extends towards noon and gets really hot, and then we leave those less exposed. We leave all the leaves there and give them some more shade. Whereas then for the afternoon,
kind of like a little hat,
kind of like that, exactly. On the afternoon side, we can pick some of the leaves away, so we get some sun on the grapes, which promotes the color buildup. So we get like deeper colored wines, and also just make sure that there's enough airflow and we don't get any kind of infections in the grape zone.
Great. And one of the other things that does is it takes out some of the green vegetal flavors of the wine by letting it ripen. And that can often be present in Pinot Noir and especially Cabernet. So we have to be very sensitive to the greenness to that. So Jonathan and I do walk, when I do get in the vineyards, we do walk those vineyards, taste those until they're at the peak of ripeness, and the green flavors are gone, because that's something that that green bell pepper jalapeno flavor, it can, to me, it's very off-putting, and I don't care for that flavor, and I don't want that in the wines that I make. So it's it's in there. So a couple other questions. We have so our soil type and ground cover.
Then
so
answer maybe the other ones, and I'll get
okay.
Get a little
So our soil type, we're on a Santa Clara formation over some clay loam, and so down about 4 feet we have this kind of clay layer. So the water drops down, it hits that, and it starts running downhill. So what we try to do when we first planted the vineyards is we ran what looked like a airplane wing, and this was dropped into the soil and run through the soil to rip and shatter the soil underneath about 4 feet down. And what that does is that helps promote the root zone growing in and above this clay layer. And so we get good coverage. So when we do get rain, these roots are well adapted to grabbing that rain. And we don't water. We try not to water. We try to dry farm to get intense flavors, low yields in the grapes. We only get about 1.5 tons, maybe 2 tons per acre, as opposed to a valley wine that's, I'm not going to pick on any wine in particular, but a box wine or a $5 or $10 bottle of wine, they're probably getting 10 to 15 tons per acre. So you take that same plant and try to get all that flavor and concentration. It's like trying to take a tea bag and getting 10 cups of tea out of it versus 1 cup of tea out of it. You're going to get what you get. So we get nice intense flavors. There's a lot of tricks you can do to that. Oh, look, he brought up some of his babies. There's a lot of tricks you can do to the wine. It's done on those lower end wines to enhance those flavors in the winery. I don't mess with those. I don't play in that play in that arena. I just want true flavors right from the vineyard. So our soil, we just, we use what we have. We plant this beautiful cover crop, so he's got a nice cross section. It look great on any counter. So explain what some of this is.
Yeah. As I said earlier, the cover crops is a custom mix I designed myself, and the basic 3 ingredients, if you will, is grains. So we have rye, oats, and barley in here. And grains, they're sort of like grass, what you would grow on your lawn, just a little bit bigger. And when they dry, they turn basically. And what's really important is they have a lot of very, very fine little roots. And these roots tend to hold the top layer of the soil together. It's almost like weaving it together. And yet one step after the other one. And this makes that, even after a rain shower, the soil holds together. I don't get a lot of erosion, and I'm sooner ready to drive with a tractor again. Then the other ingredient is the mustard. There are a couple of other things. I think we lost the mustard plant. Yeah. What's growing here so nice. There are a couple of other things here, but the mustard has these very strong, big tap roots here, and they too hold the soil together. But what also happens when I come along and mow them, the plant is going to die, but this taproot stays in the ground, and as it decomposes, it leaves sort of like a cone-shaped hole where water can very easily infiltrate in the soil and also aerates the soil. Also, the bees just love this. There's so much buzzing going on here. It's wonderful. And then we have the last category, which is the legumes, which are plants which share the ability to collect nitrogen from the air and thus act as a fertilizer, quite literally. And the plants are actually not able to do that themselves. This would be a bean, by the way. This guy here with the purple flowers, that is a pea. And then we have some vetch in between here and some clover. And these plants live in a symbiosis with certain bacteria in the ground. And you can actually see those. I come very close. So you see it here both on the clover and the beanstalk. It's kind of like from the story in the fairy tale. When you look very closely, you see tiny little like lumps, I want to say, round-shaped little lumps on the nodules on the roots, thanks. And in those nodules, there's bacteria living. And this bacteria is what's collecting the nitrogen from the air and gives it to the plant. And the plant, in return, feeds the bacteria with sugar. So it's a symbiosis. The bacteria literally infects the plant roots, but it's beneficial, sort of like the biome we have in our guts. And the plant grows sort of a home for the bacteria because the bacteria are very sensitive to oxygen. The oxygen will kill them. And as a return, these bacteria produce nitrogen compounds the plant can live from. And the plant returns the favor by feeding the bacteria sugar. And we don't have to buy any artificial fertilizers, which would be very expensive, and we would have to cart them out here and spread them. I get from a couple of pounds of clover seeds per acre the same result as a couple of hundred of pounds of nitrogen fertilizer. So that's a very nice trade-off for everybody.
Much better on the environment, but much better on the earth, much better for all of us, not to have all these, extra chemicals around. So, let's doing our part. A couple other questions. What's our elevation? Our elevation is right here. I'm standing at 831 feet. So it's above the, Santa Clara Valley. And, it's got a lot of topographic maps, and so I know this elevation very, very well. Great question about what would pair well with Asian food. both of these would pair well with Asian food. Pinot Noirs, you know, are just they're great. They have this really underlying umami sense and that kind of soy sauce and, you know, different vegetables. Certainly the Camel Hill with the root vegetable aspect to it. I would love it with, you know, really any Asian dish. You know, I couldn't think of anything that this wouldn't go with. I typically do, you know, some salmon, like a soy glazed salmon with like the Saltonstall would be great. Really goes well with you know, a nice fish like salmon, but any of that. So it's
sometimes you want to consider if it's very spicy food, be careful with wines with a high acidity. So, you know, often you'll hear like
compounds.
Asian food and Riesling. You know, I know from Germany, but you know, if you have like the spicy food and then the harsh acidity, you know, it's almost like it adds up and it burns even more. So there might be actually like a New World wine, which is a little bit lighter and softer on the acidity, a better pairing because it just is a little bit lighter on the acidity.
Great. So just want to shout out to Silicon Valley Wineries, saying hi to you guys. Thanks for joining us as well. And just letting you know that it's been fun being with you this evening. I hope you're enjoying the wines. You can certainly order these wines. We have complimentary shipping. All these wines are available. They're aging gracefully. And thanks for joining us. And Jonathan, thank you for all the information. And
well, thank you.
You know, cheers to all of you out there. Thank you.
Cheers.
See you next time.
Nice.
You answered.